Hello, everyone. You're welcome to another exciting, enlightening, and interesting episode on the Amogid Radio Communications Program. My name is Adipeju Jayoba, and together we've been looking at performance management and organizational productivity. It's such a joy and a delight to have you today. Thank you so much for joining in, and I hope your month is been amazing. While the month of May is gradually coming to an end, and I hope that all the goals and objectives you set for yourself and your organization is being met. If not, then I believe that there's still room to chase those dreams and to achieve and record amazing success. Welcome once again, and let's get right into what we have for today. So far on the series, we've been considering performance management. And one of the things that we have established is that performance management is very key and instrumental to the success, the performance and productivity of any organization. We've seen that performance management impacts the engagement of employees, impacts their performance, which in turn impacts the productivity and the success, overall success of the organization. And together we saw that performance management is the process of identifying, measuring, managing, and developing the performance of the human resources or the employees in an organization. That is what performance management is. And we've also looked at the different stages of the performance management cycle. We started with performance planning, and then from performance planning you go to your performance monitoring. You want to monitor, then you go to performance developing, where you begin to provide skills and training and learning to help employees improve, particularly in their areas of weakness. And then you have performance review or rating and rewarding. This is where you want to check how far your training or coaching or mentoring, support, encouragement, how far has it gone? What is the result, the measures of all that, support and training on the performance of the employee. And if the employee has become better at their job and have improved in their skills and competencies, you want to reward them. Then we've also considered different performance management or different performance appraisal approaches that you can use in your organization. We've talked about the essay appraisal method, which is, the rater or the evaluator or the supervisor just, putting pen to paper and writing things about, the employee that is being reviewed or being rated. We've talked about the critical incidents method, which talks about reviewing employees based on critical events that happen in your organization. We've also seen the graphical rating scales, which measures the performance of employees on a 5 or 7 scale, depending on how excellent or how skilled or how good they are or how poor they are at their job roles. So you can have skills between 1 to 5, that's excellent, good, average, or fair, poor, and then very poor. So you could have that, or you could have the 7 scale on which employee performance is measured. And we also looked at the 360 degree, which is balanced, having 4 quadrants. Some persons call it the balanced scorecard, where different persons apart from the supervisor gives their candid opinion and review regarding the employee that is being evaluated. So you have the supervisor who, or the HR manager, who provides their own appraisal. Then you have the subordinate of the employee, and then they give certain reports particularly based on behavioral competencies like leadership, based on ability to lead. Then you can have feedback from the colleagues or the team members of the employees, where they give their own appraisal based on team spirit, collaboration, innovation, creativity. And you can have, a fourth person, most of the time, from an external party, probably a client, or the customer, giving their appraisal about the employee. So those are the different approaches. I mean, there was so much more we also considered. You can visit, the show reel on Mixlr to listen to these episodes. And then after that, we looked at the characteristics of a performance or a standard performance management approach. So for any approach you're going to be using in your organization, we consider the characteristics it's supposed to have. And we said it is, the characteristics. We talked about being specific. We talked about it being fair. It must be fair. We talked about it being inclusive. We talked about it being thorough. We also mentioned that it must be measurable. It must be relevant. Those are the characteristics that we considered regarding, a standardized or a fair or an effective performance management approach. In today's episode, we're going to be considering something very important. Knowing that performance management is being done by, either the human resource manager or the business leader or the supervisor, whoever is standing in as the evaluator or as the rater. One of the things that you cannot completely eliminate or disconnect from performance appraisal is bias. That is very true, bias. People have different perspectives, different values, different beliefs, different philosophies and expectations. And all these factors come into play when performance appraisal is being done in the organization. Several social, behavioral, and neurological studies have validated that we as humans are biologically conditioned to be biased. It is just normal. We have as many views in the world as we have as many human beings. And that is, one of the uniqueness of us as a species. Although biases themselves are not necessarily good or bad or right or wrong, because it's your, perception, your philosophy or your values, and you have a right to, your biases. Sometimes they often result in unfair and irrational decisions, especially in the workplace. Biases can lead to, decisions that are unfair and irrational. It can lead to, systemic discrimination. It can lead to, imbalanced decision making. It can limit innovation and overall create a negative brand perception regarding the organization. So it is very important that everyone who is involved in performance appraisal is aware of the fact that biases can show or can, surface when a performance review or evaluation is about to take place. In fact, research has shown a corporate research, a CEB research, showed that 9 in 10 human resource leaders don't believe annual performance reviews result in accurate information, because they've seen that sometimes some performance reviews give results that are not accurate. Similarly, a survey of Fortune 1000 companies reported that 66% of employees were strongly dissatisfied with the performance evaluations they received. 71% of employees in that research perceived that their evaluations were unfair. And remember, one of the major characteristics of an effective performance management or performance appraisal system is that it must be fair. It must be standardized across board. It must be inclusive of all persons. So once employees in the organization start to perceive that, performance review is unfair, then it's that performance evaluation is no longer effective. That shows how important it is for a performance management appraisal to be fair, because once employees don't perceive it, in that light, they will not accept it. Another research also showed, in a recent Harvard Business Review paper, that only 15% of female managers and 24% of male managers have confidence in the performance evaluation process. Wow. While most viewed it as subjective and highly ambiguous. So despite consistent concerns, regarding this expressed by, HR professionals, employees, and managers about a lack of objectivity and fairness in appraisals, a recent survey of 100 large organizations reported that 57% of these 100 organizations were not taking any actions to address the biases that occurred in the performance reviews or performance appraisals that took place in the organizations. And that shows that the performance management system in those organizations will not be effective, because how do you tell if employees are being appraised in the right manner or in a fair manner or not? So today we're going to be looking at how to avoid or to limit. We might probably not be able to avoid it 100%, but how to limit biases during performance appraisal in your organization. So very quickly, I want us to look at the types of evaluation biases we have. So the first is halo error. Halo, talk about the angels or a holy person, you're talking about the halo over their head. So the first, type of evaluation bias you can have is the halo error. And this talks about the fact that performances are praised largely on the basis of a perceived positive attribute. It is based on a perceived positive performer attribute, meaning that as a manager, if you already see a particular person in a good light, most likely, anytime you want to review or appraise that employee, you most likely give that person a pass mark, because in your mind or in your perception, this person has a positive attribute, but probably a positive behavior to response to work, or probably this person is cheerful, this person is a team player. Once you already have that perception about this employee, it might cloud your judgment or cloud you seeing their flaws or their weaknesses, and that might influence the kind of appraisal you will give to that employee. The next one we have is on error, which is the opposite of the halo error. And then this one, performance is appraised largely on a perceived negative performer attribute. Perceived negative performer attribute. And this is where you already perceive that somebody is lazy, or you perceive that somebody is rude, and somehow even when the person has improved on their job or improved in character or have addressed that particular weakness or challenge, that perception can always show up in the appraisal, such that the evaluator or the rater just rates the person very low, writes negative comments about the person, because in their perception, this guy is good for nothing, or this lady is good for nothing. So that is the on effect. So you have halo for angels, you have horn for demons. That is a kind of bias that can occur during a performance evaluation. The next one is stiffness errors. Stiffness or leniency errors. And then this means when the appraiser or the manager rates the employee either too harshly or too leniently based on the rater's own standard, based on the manager's standard. So if the manager is someone who is given to excellent work, who has an outstanding work behavioral pattern, such manager would have very strict, high standards that might reflect during performance evaluation. Oh, everyone is expected to resume by 7:30 a.m. and then if you resume 7:45, it's a fail, in their books. Or you have persons who are very lenient and very soft, and they just feel like anything goes, whether you resume 7:30 or you resume 10 a.m., it doesn't matter as long as you show up at work. So you could have stiffness or leniency errors show up during a performance evaluation. The next error is the central tendency error, and this is when the appraiser or the supervisor or manager rates all employees as average performance regardless of differences in individual performance. And you have persons, managers or appraisers who are prone to this kind of bias are managers or appraisers who have very high standards, and they believe that no one can meet up to their standards. So they just rate everybody as average, and they don't consider individual performance to say, okay, amongst everyone, who are those who have stood out, who are those who contributed the most, who are those who, were exemplary. So it's so easy for someone who has a very high standard to just rate everyone as average and just give a, mediocre review about the employees. Then the next one we'll be looking at is the truth avoidance. And this is particularly, common to managers who are, I won't call them weak, but who are soft at heart, or who are, the people of, or they are the man of the people, let me put it that way. They are close to everyone, they love everyone in the organization, and then sometimes they feel like if they write the truth, or if they truthfully appraise or review an employee, it might hurt the employee, so they avoid the truth and they just write what they think might go, or they write what they think is expected of such an employee. So you have truth avoidance as a form of bias that can show up in a performance appraisal. The next one we'll be looking at very quickly is the primacy effect. And this means that the appraiser forms an immediate overall impression about the performer or the employee on the basis of some employee attributes, and sustains this impression in spite of evidence, or in spite of contrary evidence. So this means that when you have this bias shows up when a manager compares two employees, or has a certain expectation of employees, and maybe for some reason there's an employee who does not fit into that box or fit into that setting, and then the appraiser or the manager just automatically believes this person is bad. And even when there are contrary evidence to show that, this person delivers on their job, or this person is a high performer, they don't change their impression, and that can reflect in the evaluation of that employee. Another form of bias we can have is recency effect. So the first one is primacy effect, meaning that it's like a first impression, final impression. The employee does not have any other opportunity to change or to redeem their image. It's like, this is what you did the first time I met you, and that is it. That's primacy effect kind of bias. The next one is recency effect, and this kind of bias is influenced by the most recent behavior of the performer or employee and ignores other commonly demonstrated behaviors. So probably a month or 2 months to performance appraisal, the employee starts to come early, and then the manager says, this person is prompt, forgetting that probably 6-7 months prior to the announcement of performance appraisal exercise in the office, this person was an habitual late comer. So the recency effect bias can also set in during performance evaluation. Then we have the contrast error. Contrast error refers to comparison, where the appraiser or the manager or the supervisor compares two employees, either in the same department or in the organization, and reviews or appraises or rates one employee against the performance or the standards of another. And that is, a bias that can, show up. And this kind of bias disregards designated standards. So it's not so much, okay, so let me give an example. If you have an employee who comes to work by 7:30 in the morning and the resumption time is probably 9 a.m., but probably this employee lives 5 minutes away from the organization. They're single and then, they have time to resume at work on time. And then you have another employee in the organization who lives probably 1 hour away from the office building, is probably married, has kids, and then you compare the performance of this married employee who stays far away to the performance, let's say in terms of resumption, to the performance of the person who is coming in by 7:30 a.m. I mean, that would be very unjust. That would be very, unfair. But it's a bias that can set in, particularly if the behavioral competency or the performance of one employee is desirable by the manager as against the other person. And not the last type of performance bias or error that can show up that we're considering today is the illegal discrimination. And this is very common in some workplaces where the appraiser rates the performer negatively due to race, religion, gender, nationality, or disability. And this can be either a conscious or subconscious rater behavior, where a rater looks at the person and says, because you are this color or you are from this race, then you are up to no good. And that is something that must be considered seriously. Now, very quickly, I want us to look at what are the consequences of having an unfair or a biased appraisal in your organization. What will be the impact? The first is that you will favor the advancement of some persons or some groups over others, which will in turn limit the organization's ability to build a diverse leadership team. Very important. So, a very good example is saying, I prefer men because men are logical, and so we only allow men to become executives. And then you put, there's the glass ceiling effect at work in your organization where women are limited, are not allowed to rise up to management or executive roles. You might deny your organization of the uniqueness, the unique strengths, unique wisdom, unique abilities that these women can bring to your organization. So that is one, negative impact of a biased appraisal. The next is favoring some groups for certain roles, which also limits having a diverse work group in your organization. So for example, saying, women only belong to the administrative department and not maybe finance or operations, or race, for example, saying, Asians only belong to the technological space. That can limit the diversity and the innovation that your work groups or teams can experience. Another negative impact of biased appraisal is that it limits the effectiveness of organizations' performance management processes for developing and optimizing talent. And this means that when supervisors and their employees do not have reliable information on the employee performance, you can't set meaningful, relevant, and professional, developmental goals. You don't know the areas of improvement. You don't know the kind of learning or, developmental trainings that employee will need or should need, and that can hamper the productivity of the organization. Another negative impact of having a biased appraisal is it contributes to unfair compensation and rewards. So we know that in most organizations, remuneration structure is mostly linked to performance appraisal. So having a bias in the appraisal or performance management system can lead to inconsistencies in pay and reward, where individuals are either not remunerated fairly Or some individuals are being paid way much more. Probably they're probably not even as skilled, or probably they're not as excellent as some others. Once bias sets in, it can upset the remuneration structure in your organization. Another impact of a biased system in your organization is that it will contribute to unfair dismissal. That's very, very, very true. Because once bias sets in, you might not recognize excellent talent to your organization, and you might fire the wrong person or retain the wrong person once bias sets in. So sometimes you might, once, especially when, you have a negative perception about a person, even if the person now becomes, the best at the job, once that bias has not been addressed, it can, lead to unfair dismissal, or it can even impact on promotion. You see persons say they've not been promoted in years because they feel their managers don't like them just for that reason. And so that can lead to, erroneous performance appraising or review, and eventually lead to unfair dismissal. And it can also damage employee perception of their worth and value to the organization, which can lead to disengagement or voluntary termination from the organization. Because the truth is, everyone wants to feel valued. Everyone wants to feel like they're doing something, valuable. Everyone wants to feel like they're contributing their quota to the organization, no matter how little it is. And so when employees feel like they're, being reviewed unfairly, or they get very poor reviews, it might lead them to disengage from the organization. Because, no employee, a statistic showed that 69% of employees that, had their efforts and achievements rewarded and recognized, said they felt more motivated to stay, to work, and to be committed to their organization. Because everyone wants to be celebrated, everyone wants to be recognized, everyone wants to be praised and rewarded. So once you have a bias in your system, it can damage employee perception of worth and value. So what are the solutions you can bring on board? What are the things you can do? So the first that you can do is to provide unconscious bias training to managers or supervisor. What unconscious bias training does is that it helps people to understand their implicit assumptions and prejudgments. So it seeks to reduce bias in performance appraisal by transferring skills for objective assessment and developing hiring managers' ability to monitor and research their own or others' bias. And what this does is that it helps them ask questions. What exactly am I looking for? Is there a bias that I have? Sometimes some persons don't even know it's a bias until it shows up in the performance appraisal. Giving a very good example is, I'm from the southwestern part of Nigeria, and as a growing child, one of the things you hear from, the elders in community is that, oh, you can't marry from a certain tribe, or you can't do business with a certain tribe, or these people are, they are crafty, they are sifty, they're not honest, or, oh, you can't marry them, they are, they can be very, they are infidels, they are cheaters, and then this information seeped into our consciousness as the younger ones again and again. And then you grow up as an adult. Sometimes you even feel like, oh, now I'm educated, I'm more exposed, I have colleagues who are from that tribe. But unconsciously, sometimes that bias shows up. And then you just find yourself reacting to certain tribes in a particular way because of the things you've heard. So sometimes the unconscious bias training help managers to have that, what we call the aha moment, where they're like, oh, I didn't realize I thought this way. Or I didn't realize I had this assumption about this person, or I had this prejudgment about people from this religion, or people from this ethnic group, or about this individual, so that is a very important solution. Another solution that can help mitigate biases during performance appraisal is the use of formal prompts that encourage objectivity on appraisal forms. So you want to ask direct, objective questions in the form. So things like, did you consider performance throughout the entire period of the appraisal? So that's asking the manager. So the manager wants to, that would ensure that the manager is considering the appraisal throughout the, performance year or the fiscal year, and not just maybe a recent event, or not based on their recent performance. Okay, so that is a prompt. So using formal prompts, or give another example of a prompt is give 3 specific examples of how the employee demonstrated a particular capability. So that is very specific and objective. Okay, so prompts help to ensure that different assessors approach each review in a consistent and objective manner. Another solution that you can bring to your organization, which is similar to the first, is that use objective, specific, and clear evaluation criteria. Use objective, specific, and clear evaluation criteria. So creating a metric or rubric for evaluations is one of the best ways of structuring performance appraisals and driving objectivity and transparency in the appraisal process. So let there be specific standards set by the organization based on the set objectives. You cannot appraise employees outside of the objectives. For example, if the objectives is to, drive the organization to having 1,000 new clients, you can't appraise them based on getting or developing a new software, if that is not what your organization does. So you want to set specific, clear objectives based on the vision of the organization, such that managers review or appraise employees according to those standards and not according to their own, measures or expectations. Another, thing is that clearly communicate performance criteria and set development goals at the beginning of the performance period. So the employees and the managers should be aware of what is expected of them. So evaluation criteria should be communicated and agreed to ahead of the performance review period. So what this does is that it gives employees the best chance of success. It allows them time to make their mistakes, correct themselves, improve, and it also allows the employer and managers to set up metrics for tracking success during the performance period. So communication is very, very important. And then the last one that I will be looking at is limit the rating scales. So I'll use specific rating scales. For example, use maybe measures 1 to 5, rather than just saying, maybe rather than using ambiguous terms or vague terms like exceeds expectation, meets expectations. I mean, what if exceeds expectations is someone not necessarily doing their job, but just being a good gist partner with the supervisor? And I've heard of stories like that where persons won't do their job, but because they were cool buddies with the supervisors, they got good they got good reviews, while guys who come to work face their work but we're not so social in going to the supervisor's office and making small talks, were reviewed poorly, which should not be. So use specific rating scales and then limit the rating scales. Usually most researchers or most institutions would say either use the 5 rating scales or the 7 rating scales that you do between number 1 to 5 or number 1 to 7. Of course, some institutions will say you can use number 1 to 10, but just make sure that there is a is specific and is measurable, and everyone in the organization knows that this is the metrics for measurement in the organization. So very quickly, let's talk about what you can do in your organization. At any level where you are, performance appraisal is ongoing in your organization. So what can you do? So if you're a business leader, if you're the business leader, what can you do? First, understand your own biases. Very, very important. Understand your own biases. Question your behaviors and decisions to determine if they are influenced by bias or not. If you're, reviewing somebody either positively or negatively, giving them a very bad score or a very high score, you want to ask, hope this is not influenced by a particular bias. Hope I'm not reviewing this person highly because they're from my tribe, or because we, look the same way, or because we attend the same club. And if you're reviewing someone negatively, you also want to check if it's not influenced by a predetermined bias. Another thing is that, please, I'll take this point again, sir. Thank you very much. So what can you do? If you're a business leader, the first thing to do is to understand your own biases. Question your behaviors and decisions to determine if you're influenced by bias or not. Whether you're, rating an employee very highly or very poorly, you want to check if it is being influenced by a bias or not. Then the next thing is become a role model of objective behavior and share your experience. For instance, share examples of decisions you may have made in the past that were influenced by, preconceived notions or bias, and how they impacted the people involved, how or when you realize that this decision was unintendedly biased. Like I said, a lot of time biases can be subconscious. You probably don't even know it is there until you respond, to a particular person in a particular way, so you want to talk about that. Then you want to look at the lessons that you have learned and the corrective actions that you took. Then as a business leader, another thing you can do is encourage authentic practices, encourage innovation, encourage uniqueness and acceptance of a worker's whole self. That is very important. If you're a human resource professional, what can you do? You can offer workshops and, offer hands-on learning sessions to educate the entire workforce about how to identify and address their unconscious biases. Now, you might say, okay, not everyone is involved, but if your organization uses the 360-degree or the balanced scorecard performance appraisal method, where sometimes the colleagues or the subordinates have to pitch in their own reviews, you want to ensure that their biases are not reflecting in the reviews that they are giving. So you want to offer trainings on how to identify and address their biases. Then move beyond focusing only on mandatory bias to offering, workers training on bias related topics such as ways to mitigate unconscious bias, ways to integrate people with disabilities in your organization, how to manage cultural differences, how to address, gender inequality. All those things are, biases that also need to be addressed in the workplace. Then as the human resource manager, also ensure to integrate messages about unconscious bias into training for other knowledge or skills. Now, what can you do if you're a team member? You might be saying, Adepeju, I'm not a supervisor, I'm not the business leader, I'm just a team player here. What can you do? First of all, understand yourself first. Understand your biases and leverage assessment and feedback to identify blind spots. Understand yourself. Understand what is happening, with you. Understand first. Then the second thing you can do as a team member is make a conscious effort to cultivate relationships with individuals who aren't, naturally similar to you, or who don't exhibit similar traits or preferences or abilities to you. So, open up yourself to meeting new persons. Open up yourself to learning new things. Honestly, sometimes when you step out of the boundary and barrier of biases, you would realize that there is this beauty, to diversity. There's this beauty to other people. You might realize that your perception or your thinking is probably not the most excellent or probably not the best in the workplace. So open up yourself. I mean, you might learn new cultures, learn new ways of doing things. I mean, it helps you to become rounded. And so as a team member, open up yourself to cultivate relationship with persons who are uniquely different from yourself, and then be curious to understand other people's perspectives, and pause and reflect before you act. Pause and reflect before you act. That is very, very important. Wow, we've learned so much today. And I hope that right now you've learned ways on how to limit or avoid biases during performance evaluation or performance appraisals in your organization. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you can connect with us if you have questions or you have feedback or comments, you can visit us at the amogate.org. You can also follow us on social media platforms on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. We'd love to connect with you. We'd love to speak with you, and we would love to work with you. You can also visit our showreel on Mixlr, like I said earlier, to listen to previous episodes or other programs on this series. I'm sure you're going to receive useful insights and tips that can upskill the performance in your organization. Until I come your way, same time next week, keep being amazing and keep reaching for the stars. Bye for now.